My name is Ben Hodges. I'm a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General. My last assignment in the Army was as Commanding General of U.S. Army Europe, headquartered in Wiesbaden, Germany, from 2014 to 2017. During that time, I was responsible for helping to train Ukrainian forces and help them prepare to defend their own country, as well as helping to build up deterrence and defense capabilities along NATO's eastern front from the Baltic Sea down to the Black Sea. After retiring from the Army in 2018, I spent the next 4.5 years continuing to focus on the Black Sea region, advocating for a strategy for not only Ukraine, but for the entire Black Sea region. Ukraine has always mattered to Russia because of where it sits on the Black Sea. Crimea gives the Russians the ability to totally dominate the Black Sea, airfields, the seaport, and so on. And that's why Catherine the Great annexed it in 1787, but here Russia has re-annexed it illegally to get control of it because of what it represents. Now, why does the Black Sea matter? Not only because it gives access for all of these nations to the world's oceans, but also it's an east-west corridor between Eurasia and Europe. Why else does it matter? Because Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey are NATO allies. And so we've got to be prepared to assist in their defense because of our treaty obligations. And then, of course, Ukraine touches NATO, 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 NATO. That's why this region is so important. Over the coming weeks, I'll be sharing with you my assessment of what's going on in Ukraine at the technical level, at the operational level, and the strategic context. And I'll be joined several times by other experts that can offer other perspectives about why we believe Ukraine has seized the momentum and why Ukraine is going to win. I'm very happy to be joined today by Garry Kasparov, a well-known international chess champion, but also a courageous, outspoken critic of Vladimir Putin and his regime. And he leads something called the Renew Democracy Initiative. Garry, thanks for joining me today. What's the global strategic context for the war in Ukraine now?
Ukraine today is a front line of the battle between freedom and tyranny. Geopolitically, it will have dramatic consequences either way. If Putin had succeeded in taking over Kyiv in 3-4 days, as he planned, and as many experts in Europe and America believed he could do, it would have dramatic negative consequences that could be felt around the world. I would not be surprised that in that case, China could be emboldened to prepare assault on Taiwan. Now, if Ukraine prevails, that will be the opposite effect. It will embolden all freedom fighters around the world. So that's why we have to convey a very simple message to those who are listening to us. It's our war, because this war is not just about restoring Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity. This war is a war between the world we used to live, based on the rule of law, on compromises, on proper international relationships, and the world that we thought we left behind, the world of the tsars, dictators, where might is right, and where all the agreements exist as long as the powers believe that it fit their agenda.
How does this war end?
I believe that democracy always prevails, though the price we're paying now, actually, Ukrainians are paying now, it's huge. But this war will start a new era in international relations. The war between freedom and tyranny never ends. Evil doesn't die. We know that. So we celebrated the end of the Cold War and forgot about this simple fact. Evil can be buried under the rubble of Berlin Wall, but only for a while. The moment we lose our vigilance, it sprouts out. And I think that the next challenge naturally will be our conflict, hopefully without the bloodshed, with China and with many other countries that are still, not convinced about the advantages of democracy for their own people. So that's why winning this war is just, one step forward to a brighter future. But again, we simply can't afford losing the war. We simply can't afford Ukraine not recovering full territories that Putin has taken from them. It's not about Russian-Ukrainian territorial conflict. This is a conflict between two worlds, between freedom and tyranny, between two systems of values, and we have no other chance to secure a future for our children and grandchildren as to prevail in this conflict.
Thanks, Garry. Russian victory is not inevitable. Ukraine has seized the momentum, and I believe that if we, the West, stick together and deliver to Ukraine everything that we said we were going to deliver and continue to maintain the sanctions on Russia, then I believe that Ukraine is going to win. By the end of the year 2022, Ukrainian forces will push Russian forces all the way back to the 23 February line. Why am I optimistic? Russia made 4 important strategic calculations before they launched their offensive against Ukraine on 24 February 2022. Number 1, they believed that they had force advantage, that they had more capability, that they were better prepared, and that they could in fact roll into Kyiv in just a few days, almost like what they did in Budapest and in Prague during the Cold War. The second calculation was that they believed they could isolate Ukraine from third-party support, from the United States, from Europe. The third calculation that the Russians made was that the gain would be worth any pain. In other words, any casualties, any sanctions, any damage, whatever happened, it was going to be worth it because they would gain control of Crimea, the entire Black Sea coast, and Ukraine would no longer be this liberal democratic society fighting for its independence on the southern flank of Russia. The fourth calculation that the Russians made was that they would get 2 for 1. That not only would they break Ukraine and destroy it as a state and even the idea of Ukraine as a state, they also believed that they would break NATO, that the alliance would come apart, that we would not stick together in our recognition of Russia as a real threat to security and stability in Europe. All 4 of these strategic calculations by the Kremlin have turned out to be wrong. We know from history that war is a test of logistics and it's a test of wills. Whoever has the better logistics and whoever has a stronger will inevitably win. Russia's logistics system is exhausted. They don't have the ability now to launch a new offensive of their own. In fact, they are barely holding on to the territory that they've already captured. Their rear area is unsecure. Russian airfields are now being hit almost every day. Russian ammunition storage sites are being hit almost every day. Their lines of communication are vulnerable. Airfields, even in Crimea, are vulnerable. The sanctions are also taking a toll. Russia can no longer replace the precision weapons that they have employed because they need components which must be imported. Those are no longer available. So while they may seem to have millions of artillery rounds, they are running out of precision weapons, which they have been using against apartment buildings and residential areas, as well as port facilities. They also are not able to get the high-quality steel that they need to make new tank barrels or barrels for artillery. They are now having to strip out parts from airliners to replace parts that are needed on Russian Aeroflot aircraft. And because of the success of the Ukrainians on knocking out ammunition storage sites, the Russians are having to move these further and further away from the front where the ammunition is needed, which extends the lines of communication, which puts a greater burden on their truck fleet, which has already lost over 1,000 trucks in the first 6 months of the war. So we see the results, of course, in a significant reduction in the amount of artillery attacks that have been happening during the fight over the last several weeks. These are manifestations of Russia's logistical system, which was never designed to be able to do what it's having to do now, being exhausted. The Ukrainian logistics system gets a little bit stronger each week as the Russian logistics system gets a little bit weaker. It's not perfect. We have a lot of work still to do, but nonetheless, nations have delivered a lot of capability. New weapons are showing up, ammunition is showing up. These are the things that are starting to really make a difference in the ability of Ukraine to get to seize and retain the momentum. There is no doubt the Ukrainian soldiers and the Ukrainian people have demonstrated the will to defend their country, absorbing huge damage, and yet they're still there fighting and in fact have turned the tide of this war. There are millions of Ukrainians of military age that are still available to join this fight and are ready to join this fight. And in fact, thousands of them are going through training right now in Ukraine and in other European countries. Russian soldiers have no desire to be there. We see so many manifestations of this. Soldiers refusing to fight, indiscipline, war crimes. They're having to recruit people out of prisons to put them in Wagner Group mercenary organizations. The Kremlin has been reluctant to do a mobilization. Almost no Russian soldiers come from Moscow or St. Petersburg because they want to avoid having funerals in these two large cities. Russian people do not want to fight. They may support Putin, but they are absolutely not interested in fighting. And what I see from the lack of will of Russian soldiers, of Russian people, and the nonchalance of Russian ammunition handlers they cannot sustain a war effort. So it really boils down to a test of will between the Kremlin and Western governments. Kremlin so far shows that they do not care what their casualties are, they do not care what the rest of the world thinks, but I think that the will of the Kremlin right now is still very strong. And the Kremlin is counting on us in the West losing the will to continue this fight. They are assuming that domestic issues in United States and UK, Germany, Italy, France will cause us to back away from our support for Ukraine. And other countries are waiting to see if the U.S. will continue to support Ukraine the way we have been. I believe we will. The Biden administration has made it very clear, based on the amount of money that we have spent, the capabilities that are being provided, the number of soldiers that have been deployed to Europe. We recognize the threat. We recognize that this is about much more than just Ukraine. This is about security and stability of Europe, about the protection of NATO allies. It's about autocracy versus democracy. I hope you'll join us in the coming weeks as we continue to assess what's happening on the battlefield in Ukraine. We'll take a look at the tactical level of war, watch the successes of Ukrainian forces against the Russians. We'll watch the operational level of war as the Russians try to figure out how do they stop the Ukrainians and how do they extract themselves from the mess they're in right now. Can they actually repair their logistics system? Can they actually finally start fighting as a joint force? This is the test of will that we'll be watching. I look forward to seeing you next time.